They say you get quieter as you get older. I suppose that's true. The world gets louder, and you've already heard most of the songs it plays. You learn to appreciate the silence in between the notes. My wife, Eleanor, she loved the quiet of this house. She used to say it was the only place the world stopped shouting. After she was gone, the quiet became something else. Heavier, but it was still our quiet in our house, and I intended to keep it that way. The storm came in on a Tuesday, the way the worst ones always seem to, on a day of the week that has no character of its own. It wasn't a hurricane, not a tornado, nothing that would get a dramatic name and its own special graphics on the evening news. It was a vicious, anonymous squall line that tore through our county in the late afternoon. It lasted maybe 45 minutes. The sky turned a sickening shade of bruised green, the color of a deep-water fish. The wind didn't howl. It shrieked, a high-pitched metallic sound like a train car being ripped apart. I was in my study, watching the barometric pressure plummet on the digital weather station. Eleanor had bought me for my 70th birthday. I saw the drop before the first gust of wind even hit the house. A part of my brain, the part that spent 42 years with the National Weather Service, started cataloging the data automatically. The professional in me was intrigued. The homeowner was terrified. The sound that made my heart stop wasn't the wind, though. It was a deafening crack, followed by a shudder that ran through the entire frame of the house. It felt like an earthquake, a deep, violent jolt from the roof. Then came the rain, a biblical deluge that sounded like a million tiny hammers against the shingles. And then a new sound. A soft, insidious sound that every homeowner dreads. Drip, drip, drip. It was coming from the corner of the living room ceiling, the spot right under the big window in the attic where Eleanor used to keep her orchids. A dark spot appeared on the plaster, no bigger than a quarter. Then it doubled in size. Then it was a saucer. Then a dinner plate. The next morning, the world was deceptively calm. The sun was out, birds were singing, and the air smelled clean, washed by the rain. But my front yard looked like a battlefield. The massive old oak tree, the one we planted when our son David was born, had lost a limb the size of a small car. It lay across the lawn, a casualty of the night. And half the shingles on the north-facing side of my roof were gone, scattered across the grass like black broken teeth. The water damage inside was significant. The living room ceiling was ruined, and a good portion of the attic insulation was a soggy, sodden mess. I did what you're supposed to do. I'm 74. I've paid my homeowner's insurance on time every month for 48 years. Never missed a payment. With the same company, Aegis National. I thought of them as a partner, a silent promise that if the worst happened, I wouldn't be alone. I called them. The woman on the phone was pleasant enough, took my information, and said an adjuster would be in touch. A week later, a shiny new sedan pulled into my driveway. A young man got out, wearing pants that were too tight and a shirt that was too bright. He had a practiced, synthetic smile and a tablet computer tucked under his arm. He introduced himself as Kyle. He walked around the house with a perfunctory air, snapping a few pictures with his tablet. He barely glanced at the massive oak limb on the lawn. He spent all of 5 minutes on the roof. When he came down, he had that look on his face. The look of someone who has already made up their mind and is just going through the motions. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor and I had raised our son, and he swiped through his tablet with a smug little flick of his finger. He said, "Well, Clarence, I've had a look." He called me Clarence, not Mr. Miller. That was the first little signal. "And while there's definitely some situation up there," he said, gesturing vaguely towards the ceiling, "our assessment is that the primary cause of the failure is the age of the roof." I just stared at him. The drip from the living room had been temporarily stopped by a bucket, but the sound was still echoing in my head. The age of the roof? Kyle, a tree limb the size of a pickup truck hit my lawn. Half my shingles are in the neighbor's yard. This wasn't old age, this was a storm. He gave me a patient little sigh, the kind you'd give a child who doesn't understand why they can't have ice cream for breakfast. I understand that's what it looks like, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. But our data shows the winds in this area weren't at a level to cause this kind of widespread damage to a properly maintained roof. What we're seeing here is classic granular loss, brittleness, sealant failure. It's all indicative of a roof that's past its service life. The storm just revealed the pre-existing condition. He thought he was using big words. He thought he was blinding me with science. He was, in fact, dealing with a man who had written textbooks on atmospheric dynamics. He was dealing with a retired senior meteorologist for the National Weather Service, a man who had forecasted and analyzed thousands of storms, from gentle spring showers to Category 5 hurricanes. He thought he was dealing with a clueless senior. He had no idea. I kept my voice even. It was a skill I'd learned over a lifetime of dealing with bureaucracy. And what data exactly are you referring to? He smiled, proud of himself. We use a proprietary analysis, an aggregate of regional weather stations. It's very accurate. Which stations? I asked. The one at the airport, 12 miles away? Or the one downtown, surrounded by buildings that create a heat island effect and disrupt wind patterns? Did your proprietary analysis account for localized downdrafts? For convective currents? For wind shear? His smile faltered. He blinked. It was like watching a computer program buffer. We stand by our report, Clarence. The claim is denied. You'll get the official letter in the mail. He packed up his little tablet, gave me another one of those empty smiles, and left. He was probably headed to his next appointment, ready to tell some other senior citizen that their misfortune was their own fault. The letter arrived 3 days later. It was full of sterile corporate jargon. Acts of God wear and tear. Failure to maintain. It was a masterpiece of blame shifting. A document designed to make you feel helpless, to make you give up. I sat there in my quiet house, the smell of damp plaster in my nostrils, the formal denial letter in my hand, and I felt a cold, hard anger begin to form in my chest. It was an anger I hadn't felt in a very long time. Kyle and his company had made a critical mistake. They hadn't just denied my claim. They had insulted my life's work. They had called me a fool. And now I was going to show them exactly what this old fool could do. The first few days after the denial were the worst. The silence of the house was no longer a comfort. It was an accusation. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old pipes felt like a symptom of a greater decay, a decay that Kyle the adjuster had tried to pin on me. The bucket in the living room was a constant mocking presence. Drip, drip, drip. It was the sound of being dismissed, the sound of being old and in the way. Each drop hitting the plastic bottom was a tiny echo of Kyle's voice, past its service life. I found myself wandering through the rooms, tracing the path Eleanor had walked 1,000 times. I'd stand in the kitchen and remember the scent of her baking, the way she'd hum along to the radio. I'd sit in the living room and see her curled up in the big armchair with a book, her feet tucked under her. The house wasn't just wood and nails to me. It was a living archive of our life together. The water stain on the ceiling felt like a wound on her memory. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, trying to work up the courage to call my son David. He's a good boy, a successful architect living in Chicago with his own family. We talk every Sunday, a ritual we started after Eleanor passed, but this call was different. I knew what he would say, and I dreaded hearing it. Finally, I dialed. He picked up on the second ring. "Dad, how are you?" I tried to keep my voice light. "I'm all right, son. Just dealing with a bit of a mess over here." I explained about the storm, the roof, and the insurance company. I tried to downplay the frustration, to present it as just another one of life's little annoyances. There was a long pause on his end. Then the words I knew were coming. "Dad, look, maybe this is a sign." "A sign of what, David?" "You know," he said, his voice full of that gentle, well-meaning concern that feels exactly like being patronized. "That house is a lot to keep up with. It has been for a while. Maybe it's time to think about something easier. There are some really nice retirement communities near us. You'd have your own apartment, but there would be people to handle things like, well, like leaky roofs." The air went out of my lungs. He meant well. I know he did. He loved me. But in that moment, he sounded just like Kyle. He was looking at the same set of facts and coming to the same conclusion. I was old. I was past my service life. The house was too much for me. I was too much for myself. The idea of leaving this house, of packing up Eleanor's memories into boxes and moving into some sterile beige apartment complex, where the biggest event of the day was bingo, felt like a death sentence. "David, this is my home," I said, and my voice was harder than I intended. "I know, Dad, but you have to be realistic. Fighting an insurance company, that could take months, years even. It's a lot of stress, at your age." At your age. There it was. The three-word cage they build for you when you get old. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice flat. "But how? Are you going to pay for a new roof out of pocket? That's $20, maybe $30,000, Dad." I said I'll handle it, I repeated. We ended the call a few minutes later with the usual pleasantries, but something had shifted between us. He was worried, and his worry felt like a vote of no confidence. It wasn't just Aegis National that I had to prove wrong now. It was my own son. I had to prove that I wasn't just a collection of symptoms and a candidate for managed care. I was still Clarence Miller. I still had a mind that worked. I hung up the phone and felt a profound sense of isolation. I was alone in this big damaged house, fighting a faceless corporation, and my own son thought I should just surrender. The drip, drip, drip from the living room seemed to grow louder, mocking me. I walked in and stared at the ugly brown stain spreading across the ceiling. For a moment, despair washed over me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just an old man shouting at the sky. I went into the attic, the first time I'd been up there since the storm. The air was thick with the smell of wet insulation and mildew. I aimed my flashlight at the source of the leak. A section of the roof decking was splintered and cracked, clearly from a massive violent impact. It wasn't rot. It wasn't decay. It was brute force. This was the spot where Eleanor's orchids used to sit on a little wooden bench, catching the morning sun. I remembered her up here, tending to them, her hands covered in soil. She called them her divas, always demanding the perfect amount of light and water. I remembered one summer afternoon years ago. A big thunderstorm was rolling in. She was worried about a hailstorm damaging the roof. I brought her up here and pointed out the window at the approaching clouds. I explained the structure of the cumulonimbus cloud, the powerful updrafts and downdrafts that created the hail. I told her how the negative charge built up at the base of the cloud, leading to lightning. I wasn't just a husband. I was her personal weatherman. She'd listened, fascinated. She said, "You see a whole other world up there, don't you, Clarence?" Standing there in the damp, ruined attic, I thought of her words. A whole other world. Kyle from Aegis National, with his slick tablet and his proprietary analysis, he didn't see that world. He saw an actuarial table. He saw a liability. David, in his love and concern, saw a burden. They saw the problem, but they didn't understand the cause. And in that moment, standing under the wound in my own roof, the despair began to recede, replaced by something else. A cold, clear resolve. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even just about the house. It was about the truth. The truth was in the data. The truth was in the sky on that Tuesday afternoon. And I was one of the few people on the planet who knew how to find it and prove it. They had dismissed Clarence Miller, the 74-year-old widower. They were about to meet Dr. Clarence Miller, senior meteorologist, retired from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I went back downstairs, the feeling of purpose thrumming through me like a low-voltage current. The drip, drip, drip from the bucket no longer sounded like a mockery. It sounded like a metronome, a clock ticking down. I walked into my study, a room lined with books on fluid dynamics and atmospheric physics. I sat down in my old leather chair, the one with the worn-out spots on the arms, and I picked up the phone again. This time I wasn't calling my son. I was calling my old friend and colleague, Frank Peterson. Frank had been the head of the severe weather desk at the NWS when I ran the forecasting division. He was even more cantankerous and detail-obsessed than I was. He answered the phone with his usual gruff, "What is it?" "Frank," I said, a smile touching my lips for the first time in days. "I need a favor. I'm going to war with my insurance company, and I need access to the NXRAD Level 2 archive." There was a pause, and then I heard a low chuckle on the other end of the line. "Aegis National get you too?" he asked. "Let me guess. Old age?" "You have no idea," I said. "Frank, they think I'm a moron." "Well," Frank said, his voice full of gravelly amusement, "let's prove them wrong. What time was the event? I'll pull the full data package for you. Base reflectivity, storm relative velocity, vertical liquid water, the works. You going to build a model?" "No," I said, looking around my study, at the shelves of research papers and the powerful, if slightly outdated, computer in the corner. "I'm going to write a peer-reviewed paper on the atmospheric event that occurred directly over my house, and then I'm going to send it to them." Frank was silent for a long moment. Then he let out a loud barking laugh. "Clarence, you beautiful crazy old man. This is going to be epic. Send me the coordinates. I'll have the data packet on your server by morning." When I hung up the phone, the house felt different again. The quiet was no longer heavy. It was focused. It was the quiet of a laboratory, the quiet of a command center. The catalyst wasn't a single event, but a convergence of everything. The condescension, the dismissal, my son's worry, Eleanor's memory. It all coalesced into a single sharp point of action. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about setting the record straight. It was about science. But deep down, a part of me knew that the most satisfying truths are the ones that your enemies are forced to accept. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. There was a new energy in my veins. The aches and pains of being 74 seemed to have temporarily retreated. I made coffee, strong and black, and went into my study. On my computer screen, a new folder was waiting, sent from Frank. It was labeled simply, "The Miller Event." I opened it. It was beautiful. Terabytes of raw data, a complete, high-resolution portrait of the atmosphere over my county for the entire day of the storm. This wasn't the aggregated, dumbed-down summary that Kyle's tablet used. This was the real thing, the source code of the sky. I turned my study into the war room it had once been when I was tracking major hurricane landfalls. I had 3 monitors on my desk. On the left, I loaded the barometric pressure readings from a dozen local amateur weather stations, a mesonet, as we call it. In the center, the crown jewel, the NXRAD Level 2 Doppler radar data. On the right, I had charts for plotting wind shear and temperature gradients. This was my native language. For 42 years, I had interpreted these abstract colors and numbers into forecasts that saved lives and property. Now, I was doing it to save my own. I spent the first few hours just immersing myself in the data, letting the story of the storm tell itself to me. I could see the squall line forming in the west, a narrow band of intense convection. I watched it race across the state. The data from the airport station, the one Aegis National had likely based their entire flimsy denial on, was deceptive. It showed strong winds, yes, but nothing catastrophic. It was a classic case of looking at the wrong scale. A storm isn't a single uniform entity. It's a chaotic system, full of localized extremes. They had used a wide-angle lens to look at something that required a microscope. My focus narrowed to the 15-minute window when the storm passed directly over my neighborhood. I started layering the Doppler data. First, base reflectivity, which shows the intensity of the precipitation. A dark red and purple core passed right over my street. That was the deluge. Standard stuff for a severe thunderstorm. Then I switched to storm relative velocity. This is where the magic happens. This display shows the speed and direction of the wind within the storm. Green colors indicate winds moving toward the radar. Red indicates winds moving away. When you see a tight, bright patch of green right next to a tight, bright patch of red, you've found rotation. You've found a potential tornado. But that's not what I was seeing. I was seeing something more subtle, and in some ways, more violent. I saw a massive plume of green high up in the storm, tens of thousands of feet in the air, indicating a powerful downdraft of rain-cooled air plummeting towards the ground. Then, as I lowered the altitude slice on the radar display, I saw that green plume slam into the ground and spread out in all directions, creating a fan of intense, damaging straight-line winds. It was a classic starburst pattern on the velocity display. This wasn't just a storm, this was a microburst, a concentrated, focused blast of air, like a fist punching the earth from above. "Got you," I whispered to the empty room. I started cross-referencing. The barometric pressure data from the weather station at the local high school, less than a mile away, showed a sudden sharp pressure spike right at that moment, a telltale sign of a downburst. The wind shear data showed a dramatic change in wind speed and direction in the lowest 1,000 feet of the atmosphere. It was a textbook case. Now I had to classify it. Based on the velocity data, I estimated the wind speeds in that outflow boundary to be well over 100 miles per hour, according to the Fujita scale, which we also use to classify downburst damage. That put it firmly in the F1 category for a tornado, which translates to a Class 3 microburst. This wasn't just a storm. It was a discrete, classifiable, and scientifically verifiable weather event of extreme violence. An event that no residential roof, regardless of age, is designed to withstand. The condescending words of Kyle the adjuster echoed in my head. Winds in this area weren't at a level to cause this kind of damage. He was a liar. Or worse, an ignorant pawn in a system designed to cheat people. My anger, which had been a cold, hard resolve, began to heat up. It was becoming personal. Now came the part that required not just science but art. I had to build my case. I couldn't just send them a bunch of raw data. I had to write a report, a formal academic-style paper complete with an abstract, an introduction, a methodology section, data analysis, and a conclusion. It had to be so thorough, so professional, and so utterly unassailable that any meteorologist who looked at it would nod in agreement, and any lawyer would advise their client to run for the hills. For the next week, I worked relentlessly. I was up at dawn, and often worked past midnight. The rest of the world ceased to exist. My son called and I gave him a brief, non-committal update, telling him I was working on an appeal. I think he pictured me writing a strongly worded letter. He had no idea I was forging a weapon. I used specialized software to generate charts and graphs. I created a 3D rendered map showing the storm's path and highlighting the microburst's location directly over a satellite image of my house. I annotated the Doppler radar images, drawing arrows to show the wind patterns and circling the key signatures. I wrote the text in the dry, passive voice of a scientific journal. Data were collected. Analysis indicates. It is concluded that. There was no emotion in the words, but the document itself was an act of pure distilled fury. I included a section anticipating and dismantling their arguments. I cited the specific limitations of using distant single-point weather stations for analyzing convective storm events. I quoted from the American Society of Civil Engineers standards on wind load and building envelope integrity. I even found a white paper published by a meteorological consulting firm. Ironically, a firm that sometimes did work for the insurance industry, that detailed the destructive power of microbursts. I cited it in my bibliography. As I was finishing up, I called Frank again. Frank, I need you to do something for me. I need you to peer review this. You're kidding, he said. I am deadly serious thing to be bulletproof. I'm sending a copy to the State Insurance Commission. I want it to look like it came straight from the pages of the Journal of Atmospheric Sciences. I emailed him the draft. 2 hours later, he called me back. His voice was full of awe. Clarence, this is a thing of beauty. It's perfect. The only note I have is a typo on page 6. You magnificent old bastard, you're not just going to get a new roof. You're going to get them to issue a public apology. That's when another idea began to form. An apology from a faceless corporation was unlikely. But public humiliation? That was achievable. It wasn't enough to be right. They had to be proven wrong, publicly. I did a little research online and found the I-team at Channel 4 News. They were the local station's investigative unit, the ones who went after shady contractors and corrupt politicians. Their lead reporter was a woman named Sarah Jenkins. She had a reputation for being tough, fair, and relentless. She was my kind of people. I didn't just call the station's tip line. That would have been amateurish. Instead, I drafted a professional, one-page press release. I titled it Retired, Ned BOA's senior meteorologist challenges insurance giant storm claim denial with peer-reviewed atmospheric analysis. In the body, I summarized the event, the denial, and the findings of my report. I attached the report's abstract as a PDF. I sent the email directly to Sarah Jenkins. I knew reporters got hundreds of emails a day. Mine had to stand out. It had to be professional. It had to smell like a real story. The secret plan was complete. I had my weapon, a 20-page peer-review quality report proving a Class 3 microburst occurred directly over my house. I had my distribution list, a copy for the enemy, a copy for the regulator, and a copy for the media. The next morning, I went to the post office. I prepared 3 identical large manila envelopes. Inside each, a pristine, spiral-bound copy of my report. One was addressed to Mr. Kyle Miller, care of Aegis National Insurance, with a note to his supervisor. The second was addressed to the head of consumer complaints at the State Insurance Commission. The third was for Sarah Jenkins at Channel 4, just in case my email had been missed. I paid for certified mail for all 3, with return receipt requested. The satisfying thump, thump, thump of the postal clerk stamping the packages was the opening salvo in my quiet war. I walked out of the post office into the bright morning sun, feeling lighter than I had in years. The ball was no longer in my court. It was a 20-page guided missile, and it was headed straight for them. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of despair or the silence of focus. It was the silence of a hunter in a blind, waiting for the quarry to step into the clearing. I knew from the tracking numbers that all 3 packages had been delivered on a Thursday morning. Now it was just a matter of time. I spent Thursday and Friday going about my business, or pretending to. I tidied up the house. I did some work in the garden, trimming back the bushes that had been battered by the storm. I even tried to read a book, but I couldn't focus. My ears were constantly tuned for the ringing of the phone. Every car that drove down my street made me glance out the window. The first shot was fired at 10:15 a.m. on Monday. The phone rang and the caller ID showed a number I recognized from Aegis National's letterhead. I let it ring 3 times, took a slow, deep breath and answered. Clarence Miller speaking. There was a moment of sputtering on the other end. Yes, Mr. Miller. This is Kyle. His voice was completely different. The slick, confident condescension was gone. In its place was a high-pitched, flustered panic. The practiced smoothness had been sanded away, revealing the nervous young man underneath. He was off script now, and he was lost. Yes, Kyle, I said, keeping my own voice calm, level, and cool. We received a document from you. A report. He said the word reports like it was a strange alien object he didn't know how to handle. That's correct, I said. It's my formal appeal of your denial, along with the supporting data and analysis. I trust it was delivered to your supervisor, as well. Yes, it was. Mr. Miller, this is highly unusual. We don't typically handle appeals this way. There's a form you're supposed to fill out." I almost laughed. A form. They wanted to reduce my life's work, my scientific proof, to a series of checkboxes on a bureaucratic form. I felt the situation warranted a more detailed response, I said. Given the gross inaccuracies in your initial assessment, I could hear him breathing. A shallow, rapid sound. "Look, I need to have my manager call you. This is above my pay grade." "I imagine it is," I said, and gently hung up the phone. I sat back in my chair with a grim sense of satisfaction. Phase 1 of the enemy's panic was complete. The front-line soldier was in disarray and calling for his commanding officer. I didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, the phone rang again. A different number, but still from Aegis. I answered with the same calm greeting. "Mr. Clarence Miller?" The voice was female, sharp and professional, but with an unmistakable edge of irritation. "This is Susan Pierce. I'm the regional claims manager for Aegis National. I'm Kyle's supervisor." "Good morning, Miss Pierce," I said. "Mr. Miller, I'm looking at this document you sent us. 20 pages of meteorological data. This is, to be frank, absurd. We are an insurance company, not a university." She was trying to regain control, to frame me as the eccentric one, the nutcase. "With all due respect, Miss Pierce," I replied, my voice still even, "you are an insurance company that makes decisions based on meteorological data. When your data is flawed, or more accurately, when your interpretation of it is flawed, you make incorrect decisions. I simply provided a more accurate analysis to help you correct your error." There was a frustrated sigh on the other end. "Our analysis is based on industry standard models." I cut her off. I knew I couldn't let her control the narrative. "Your industry standard model, Miss Pierce, failed to detect a Class 3 microburst that occurred directly over my property, an event with ground-level winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. My report not only proves its existence, but also maps its trajectory to within a few hundred feet. Are you telling me that Aegis National's official position is that such an event is simple wear and tear?" Silence. I had used their own jargon against them, and backed it up with a fact she couldn't easily dispute without sounding like an idiot. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to find a new angle of attack. "This is a highly technical claim, Mr. Miller," she finally said, her voice tight. "We will have to have our own experts review your findings. This will take some time." "Take all the time you need," I said. "I've already sent a full copy to the State Insurance Commission for their review. I imagine they'll be in touch with you shortly to ask why one of your adjusters is classifying very severe weather events as maintenance issues. It seems like it might be a pattern they'd find interesting." I heard a sharp intake of breath. This was the 1-2 punch. First the data, then the regulator. I had just informed her that this was no longer a private dispute. It was now a matter of official record with the body that held her company's license to operate in the state. Her professional, irritated tone evaporated, replaced by the same panic I'd heard in Kyle's voice, only better hidden. That won't be necessary, Mr. Miller," she said quickly. "Let me personally review this. I'll be back in touch by the end of the day." "I look forward to it," I said, and hung up. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. My hands were perfectly steady. The fear and helplessness I'd felt just a week ago were gone, replaced by the exhilarating clarity of a well-executed plan. They were panicked. They were on the defensive. The power had begun to shift. The rest of the day was quiet. Susan Pierce did not call back. This didn't surprise me. She was scrambling, talking to her bosses, talking to their legal department. They were trying to figure out what kind of problem I was. Was I a crank they could ignore? Or was I a genuine threat they needed to neutralize? The answer to that question came the next morning. Not from the insurance company, but from Channel 4 News. At 9:30 a.m., my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Clarence Miller?" The voice was energetic, sharp, and intelligent. "It is," I said. "Mr. Miller, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm the lead investigative reporter for the Channel 4I team. I got your email, and I've just finished reading your report. And all I can say is, wow. A genuine smile spread across my face. I'm glad it caught your interest, Miss Jenkins. Caught my interest? Mr. Miller, this is one of the most well-documented open and shut cases of corporate malfeasance I've ever seen. A 74-year-old retired NWS scientist using Doppler radar to fight his insurance company? This isn't just a story. This is a movie. Would you be willing to speak with us on camera? I'd love to send a crew out to your house this afternoon. I would be delighted, I said. Excellent, she said, the excitement evident in her voice. And would it be all right if we brought our own meteorologist? Our guy, Tom, is a huge weather nerd. He read your abstract and he's practically bouncing off the walls. He said your analysis is impeccable. The silent takeover was complete. Aegis National thought they were in a private, contained dispute they could manage. They had no idea that in a few hours, a television news crew would be parked in my driveway, preparing to broadcast my story all over the state. Their little problem was about to go public in the most spectacular way possible. I wasn't just a claimant anymore. I was a cause, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. The Channel 4 news van was a surprisingly discreet, unmarked white vehicle, but to me it felt like the cavalry arriving. Sarah Jenkins was even more impressive in person. She had a sharp, focused energy and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She shook my hand firmly and introduced me to her cameraman and to Tom, the station's on-air meteorologist. Tom was a younger man, maybe in his late 30s, and he looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hero worship. Dr. Miller, he said, shaking my hand vigorously. It's an absolute honor. I've read your papers on mesoscale convective systems. Your report on this microburst it's a work of art. The way you use the velocity data to map the outflow boundary, brilliant. For the first time I felt a kinship in this fight. This wasn't just my personal battle anymore. Sarah saw a story of injustice. Tom saw a story of scientific elegance. They got it. We spent 2 hours filming. They interviewed me in my study, the monitors in the background displaying the colorful, dramatic radar images from my report. I explained in simple terms what a microburst was. I told the story of Kyle's visit, his condescending tone, the flimsy denial. Sarah was a master at her craft, asking questions that allowed me to tell the story naturally, to be the calm, rational victim of a cold, indifferent system. They filmed the water-stained ceiling, the bucket in the living room, and the giant fallen limb of the oak tree in my yard. It was powerful, visual evidence of the violence of the storm. Then Sarah did something clever. She had Tom, their own expert, stand in front of a green screen they'd set up in my living room. He explained the science of my report to the audience, using graphics the station had prepared. He confirmed every one of my findings, concluding with, "There is no doubt, from a meteorological standpoint, that a significant and damaging weather event occurred at this location. To classify it as anything else is, frankly, indefensible." The story aired that night on the 6 p.m. news. It was the lead story. Sarah had edited it brilliantly. It opened with a shot of me, a gray-haired man, sitting quietly in his book-lined study. Then cut to the dramatic radar loops and the damaged house. It contrasted my calm, factual explanations with the weaselly, jargon-filled denial letter from Aegis National, which they showed in a close-up. They included a clip of Sarah calling Aegis for a comment, only to be met with a flustered no comment at this time. The final shot was of me, standing on my porch, looking out at my quiet street. The segment ended with Sarah's voiceover. A man of science, a man who has paid his premiums for nearly 50 years, forced to use the skills of a lifetime to fight for what's right. For the I-Team, I'm Sarah Jenkins. The dam broke. My phone started ringing before the news was even over. First it was my neighbors, then people from across town. The story had touched a nerve. It turned out I wasn't the only one. Dozens of people had had their storm claims denied by Aegis for similar flimsy reasons. They just didn't have a PhD in atmospheric science to fight back. Sarah Jenkins' producer called me an hour later, breathless. "Our tip line is on fire," she said. "We have a class action lawsuit's worth of people calling in." The power had shifted decisively. It was no longer about my roof. I had become the face of a community's frustration. This wasn't a family exodus, but it was something just as powerful, a public exodus of trust. Aegis National wasn't just an insurance company anymore. They were a villain in a news story, the bully who tried to cheat a kindly old scientist. The next morning, I received a call from a man named Henderson. He didn't work at the regional office. His title was Senior Vice President of Claims North America. He was calling from corporate headquarters in Hartford, Connecticut. His voice was smooth as silk, a carefully modulated baritone of corporate concern. "Dr. Miller," he began, a title they had pointedly refused to use until now. "I want to personally apologize for the breakdown in communication regarding your claim. I've reviewed your file and your news report, and it's clear a serious error was made." "An error?" I said. "It felt more like a policy, Mr. Henderson." He chose to ignore that. "We are of course going to approve your claim in full. We will cover the entire cost of a new roof and all the interior repairs. Furthermore, to compensate you for the distress and inconvenience this has caused, we are prepared to offer an additional $25,000. It was a tempting offer. It was more than enough to fix everything and then some. But then came the hook. "All we ask," he continued, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur, "is that you sign a standard non-disclosure agreement. It would of course require you to retract your complaint with the Insurance Commission and agree not to speak any further with the media about this matter." There it was. The hush money. They didn't care about making it right. They cared about making it quiet. They wanted to buy my silence, to turn me from a public symbol of their malfeasance back into a private anonymous customer. Just as I was about to respond, my doorbell rang. I walked to the door, the cordless phone still pressed to my ear. Standing on my porch was my son, David. He'd flown in from Chicago without telling me. He had a small suitcase in one hand and a look of profound pride and apology on his face. He had seen the news story. He stepped inside and gave me a hug, a real one, the kind we hadn't shared in years. "Dad," he whispered, "I am so sorry." I hugged him back, and a wave of emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel washed over me. I turned my attention back to the phone, to the slick executive from Hartford waiting for my answer. With my son standing right there, my resolve hardened into diamond. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice clear and strong, "the offer is noted. My son, who is an architect, and I will need to discuss it. We will be in touch to schedule a meeting. Here, at my house." I hung up before he could reply. The power shift was complete. They were no longer dictating terms. They were coming to me on my turf to beg for a truce, and I was going to make them wait. The meeting was set for 2 days later. Henderson agreed to fly in from Hartford. He clearly thought this would be a simple transaction, a quick signature on a document in exchange for a check. He was still under the illusion that money was the object. He didn't understand that the currency had changed. The object was now justice. The morning of the meeting, David and I sat at the kitchen table. He'd spent the previous day inspecting the damage, his architect's eye seeing things I had missed. He'd put together a preliminary estimate for the repairs that was nearly double what I had guessed. "They didn't just damage the shingles, Dad," he'd said, his voice. "The impact fractured 2 of the main roof trusses. This isn't a patch job. The whole structure up there needs to be rebuilt." David looked at me over his coffee cup. "So what's the plan? Are you going to take the deal? What do you think I should do?" I asked him. He was quiet for a moment. The son who had, just a week ago, advised me to give up and move into a retirement community was gone. In his place was a man looking at his father with newfound respect. "A week ago I would have told you to take the money and run," he said. "But now, Dad, what you did was incredible. It's not just about our house anymore, is it?" "No, son," I said. It's not. Henderson arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, driven in a black town car. He was exactly as I'd pictured: expensive suit, perfect hair, a handshake that was firm but had no warmth in it. He carried a sleek leather briefcase. He walked into my living room, pointedly ignoring the water stain on the ceiling and the bucket in the corner, and sat on the edge of the sofa as if he were afraid of catching something. "Dr. Miller, David," he said, opening his briefcase with a crisp snap. "A pleasure to meet you in person. I have the settlement agreement right here. A very generous offer, I think you'll agree." He slid the document across the coffee table. I didn't even look at it. "Before we discuss your offer, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice calm, "I want you to understand something. This wasn't about the money. Not at first. I paid my premiums to your company for 48 years. I trusted you. When your adjuster, Kyle, sat at that very table and lied to my face, he broke that trust. When he dismissed me as a feeble old man who didn't know any better, he made it personal." I leaned forward slightly. "It wasn't about revenge until it was. Until your company's arrogance forced me to defend not just my home, but my intellect and my dignity." Henderson's practiced smile tightened at the edges. "I assure you, Dr. Miller, that was not our intention. Kyle is a junior adjuster. He made a mistake. He has been reprimanded." "Reprimanded," I said with a short, humorless laugh. "I have a list, Mr. Henderson. A list of 17 other families in this county who received nearly identical denial letters from your company, signed by 4 different adjusters. This wasn't a mistake. This was a business strategy. A strategy of institutionalized elder abuse, predicated on the assumption that seniors are too tired, too ignorant, or too intimidated to fight back. You didn't just make a mistake with me. You got caught." The color drained from Henderson's face. He knew in that instant that I had him. The list, provided by Sarah Jenkins' producer, was my trump card. "So no," I continued, my voice as cold and hard as iron, "I will not be signing your non-disclosure agreement. I will not be retracting my complaint with the State Insurance Commission. And I will continue to speak with Miss Jenkins and the I-Team, who I believe are preparing a follow-up story on Aegis National's systemic fraud." David, sitting next to me, spoke for the first time. His voice was firm, the voice of a professional used to dealing with contractors and developers. "And as for the settlement," he said, sliding his own folder across the table towards Henderson, "your offer is rejected. This is our counter-offer. It includes the full, architect-verified cost of rebuilding the roof structure, all interior repairs, mold remediation, landscaping to remove the fallen tree, and temporary housing costs during the 6 weeks of construction. It also includes punitive damages for acting in bad faith. You can either agree to this, or we can turn this list of names over to a class action attorney. Your choice." Henderson stared at the folder, then at me, then at David. The mask of corporate control was gone. He looked like what he was, a man in a very expensive suit who had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. He had walked into my house expecting to silence a grumpy old man. He was now facing a public relations nightmare, a regulatory investigation, and a massive lawsuit, all orchestrated from a book-lined study by a 74-year-old meteorologist. He slowly opened the folder David had given him. He read the number at the bottom. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He closed the folder, took a deep breath, and seemed to age 10 years right there on my sofa. "You'll have a check by the end of the day," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. The new reality had set in. He stood up, not even bothering to pack his useless settlement agreement back into his briefcase, and walked out of my house without another word. The confrontation was over. I had won. A few months have passed since that day. The house is quiet again, but it's a good quiet. The kind of quiet Eleanor and I always cherished. A brand new roof sits overhead, its shingles perfectly aligned. The living room ceiling is smooth and white, freshly painted. Outside, the old oak tree has been professionally trimmed and a new young maple has been planted in the yard, a promise of future shade. The fallout for Aegis National was significant. Their stock took a hit after the second I-Team report aired, the one detailing their systemic denials. The State Insurance Commission fined them heavily and forced them to reopen and review every storm-related claim from the past 2 years. Kyle, the adjuster who started it all, was fired, a small but satisfying piece of karmic justice. Henderson, I heard, was moved to a less prestigious position within the company. My son David calls more often now. Our conversations are different. He asks for my opinions. He sees me not as a fragile liability, but as the man who took on a corporate giant and won. He's planning to bring his family for a long visit this summer. The thought of hearing my grandchildren's laughter echoing through these halls again fills me with a joy I thought I'd lost forever. I've become something of a local celebrity, the weatherman who fought the suits. People stop me in the grocery store to shake my hand. I've even helped a few of my neighbors with their own insurance battles, showing them how to document their cases and where to find the leverage. It feels good to turn my knowledge into something that helps others. Sometimes I sit here in my study, looking at the framed copy of my 20-page report that David had made for me. It's a reminder that you should never let anyone define you by your age. They might see gray hair and a slower step, but they don't see the lifetime of knowledge stored behind your eyes. They don't see the experience, the patience, the quiet resolve that only comes with time. They thought they were dealing with a clueless senior, an easy mark. They forgot that the oldest trees have the deepest roots. They forgot that a lifetime of studying storms teaches you exactly how to become one when you need to. It was never really about the roof. It was about respect. The respect they tried to take from me, and the self-respect I had to fight to reclaim. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or made to feel invisible because of your age, or for any other reason, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories of everyday people finding their extraordinary strength. Thank you for listening.